So we believe in a God who is all love and mercy and compassion. And yet we also are very aware that life is very difficult and very painful with all sorts of different sufferings. And the contradiction between these two realities is probably the biggest reason why people don't believe in God. You know, they say this idea of a God who is caring and loving is absolute rubbish because we don't see the evidence of it. We feel like we're abandoned into this world of pain and God's not doing anything to help us. So I think one of the biggest things for us, if we actually want to persevere in this journey of Christianity, is to understand what on earth God is doing. What we see really is this image in the scriptures today of a God who is very much like a parent. Now, for those who are parents, you're going to understand this a whole lot better. You know, that you want to love and care for your children, but you know that they are never going to become adults unless they experience hardship. And so you have to walk this very difficult line where I want to be able to save you, I want to rescue you, but not yet. Not until you've learnt something through this process. Not until something of this sickness has helped you develop resilience. Or not until this hardship with your friends at school has helped you to gain some sort of emotional maturity. In the same way, when you see a parent trying to teach a child to walk, they stand behind them, ready to catch them. But at the same time, they're very willing to let the child fall because it's the only way they can develop the strength. If the child is carried for too long, they're just not going to be able to walk. They can't develop the strength. Yeah, I think the other great image that we see in nature, as you're very familiar with that image of a caterpillar becoming a butterfly, that idea of metamorphosis. But the whole point is that in that transition point, this caterpillar has turned into a butterfly, but it's still inside the cocoon. It has to fight with every ounce of strength in it to rip the cocoon open. And that process is essential because it's in the actual act of trying to tear open the cocoon that it develops the strength to fly. If a person comes along and tries to be compassionate and rips open the cocoon for it, this butterfly will never have the strength to get off the ground. Now, to use those images, because I think this is something of what the scriptures are trying to reveal to us. You are not meant to live on earth. You know, you are meant to live for heaven. You are meant to be prepared for something so much greater than anything this world presents to you. And so the sufferings and the difficulties of this life are in some way training us, shaping us for that glory. You know, St. Paul says this very clearly. The troubles which are soon over, though they weigh little, they train us for the carrying of a weight of eternal glory, which is out of all proportion to them. You know, the sufferings and difficulties that we face now are almost like the training ground, preparing our heart to be able to experience the glory of heaven. You know, the image that I sometimes use, if you imagine that you got a letter this week from the Australian Reserve Bank saying that in 6 months' time you're going to have the chance to go into their gold reserves and you can take anything you can carry. You know, as much gold as you can carry with your hands, you can walk out of there and that's yours. What would you do? You know, my guess is you'd probably sign up for a gym membership. You know, you would want to be as strong as you can be in 6 months' time so that you can carry as much out of there in that time. But in some sense, that's the vision we need to have for our life. You know, we naturally act like 2-year-olds. We want comfort. We want everything to be about ourselves. We don't want any suffering. And we chuck a tantrum as soon as something bad happens. You know, you see this all the time where people don't spend any time thinking about God at all until something bad happens, and then they know exactly who to blame. You know, we scream and we shout, "How dare you? How unjust this is that you make me suffer." And yet we fail to realize that this is actually God coaching us, training us, because he knows what we're going towards. That it is through these things that we actually become spiritual adults. We are able to then carry the weight of glory that he has prepared for us. Now you see this all the way through the scriptures. I mean, the first reading we had, this is the fall of Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve have acted like children. They've tried to steal their glory. And what sounds like a punishment in some sense is actually God's remedy. God says, look, because you've done this, life's going to be really difficult for you. But it is through the hardships that you are going to discover the real meaning of life. That's from Genesis chapter 3. You go to the next chapter in chapter 4, and you've got the story of Cain and Abel. If you're familiar with that story, the two brothers, Cain is not particularly happy with his brother Abel, and he's tempted to kill him. Life would be so much easier without him. And God intervenes and speaks directly to Cain and says, sin is lurking at the door. Its desire is for you, and you have to master it. And it's a really profound line, because God is saying, I'm not going to come and rescue you here, but rather I'm going to give you the grace you need to now step up and fight against this temptation. And it's through fighting that you are going to find liberation. Now, Cain doesn't fight, and he kills his brother, and it all turns out terrible. Now, you jump forward a bit more in the Bible to the book of Judges, and you have a situation where the people of Israel are in the promised land, but they are surrounded by all these other pagan nations with pagan gods. And God basically says to them, I'm not going to get rid of them. These other nations are going to stand as a permanent temptation to you, and you have to fight. You have to find something within yourself where you desire God more than you desire the easy life. And so that basically maps out for us the rest of the history of the Bible. You have certain generations where they find within themselves the strength and the courage to pursue the good. And you have other generations where they just choose to rather be like 2-year-olds, and they give into everything. And this is kind of where we find ourselves, where God has almost set up the world in a way where there is hardship, there is evil. And in many respects, God doesn't create the evil, or he doesn't create the sickness, but there's almost a situation where he'll allow it to happen to bring about a greater good. His grace will be there to work with you through these things so that you can actually discover who you really are. One of the great mysteries I marvel at is that often the people I've met who have suffered the most are the people who are the most joyful or are the most at peace. It's often the other way around as well. Often when I meet people who are really at peace with themselves, if you dig a bit deeper and ask a few questions, you realize they've had traumatic lives. And there's something of this mystery where they've been able to see where the hand of God is in the midst of all of that. And they've been able to somehow be surrendered to that grace and allow the grace of God to work in them, to change them and shape them and mold them into the person they're meant to be. And really, I think this is where we start to understand why Jesus came and died on the cross for us. He comes to lead the way. He comes into the world of pain and suffering to say, I'm not going to just abandon you, but rather I'm going to carve the path and show you that there is a way here of finding liberation through the mess and the pain of what it is to be human. that he would take on himself the hardship, the hunger, the poverty, all of that. And then for him to say, I am the way, the truth, and the life. That in some way, the way to heaven is actually through your humanity. It's through that human experience of hardship. God is going to shape you and train you so that you can now claim the full inheritance that is given to us in eternal life. So we come here into this Eucharist where we unite ourselves in some way with the suffering of Jesus. But then we also claim and unite ourselves with that power of his resurrection. So whatever it is you're experiencing at this time, whatever suffering, to be aware of that battle within yourself, where that little 2-year-old wants to chuck a tantrum and blame God. That's the place I think we need to call out to God and say, Lord, walk with me through this journey. Help me to make sense of it and to find you and to realize how you are shaping and preparing my heart for my true homeland in heaven.